So before we get into that from a healthcare perspective, I wanted to actually just set up this paradigm real quick. So I've been fortunate enough to work in a number of industries, and I would say the big emerging thing that's happened over the last 15 years is this creation of these data flywheels. And what do I mean when I say data flywheel? So historically, what we did is we either relied on our intuition or some piece of technology to collect data on our behalf. We did some amount of manual analysis of that. We tried to make some decisions. We tried to find trends and anomalies in that data. And when we found those things, we would try to take some corrective action. Hey, this is somebody that's experiencing this condition. This is the recommended intervention. Let's do it, and let's make sure that they get away from that condition as quickly as we possibly can. So what has happened is, with the advent of cloud computing and some of what's going on in AI, combined with what we've been able to do with technology, we've created these automated loops that can actually do this on our behalf. So we can take the data that we collect, we can feed it through an algorithm that can actually analyze the data on our behalf, and we can tie the outcome of that algorithm to some automated action. And by doing that, we can actually collect better data that can further refine our algorithms and drive better actions as we go. And if you want to see that, you can almost think of every single company in the bottom left here as a data flywheel company. So let's take an example. Netflix collects information on what people watch. They analyze that data to learn what other things those people should watch. They surface recommendations, and by doing that, they actually get better data on what people are going to go. Tesla, as an example, will win the self-driving car game. And the reason they will win that game is because to date, their cars have driven over 8 billion miles, of which over 1 billion of those miles was fully automated driving. So as they take more of these actions, they see where they're getting better or worse, they improve their data, they improve their algorithms, they improve their outcome. And from a business perspective, this is actually really great because we can actually measure the quality of the actions that we're taking since we have this closed loop data ecosystem. We have the nice thing that we want, which is as we do this more and more often, our products get better. And because it gets better, we can then take better action because we have better data and we can drive more users, right? So this flywheel is really hard to break. It's why when you look at those companies, with maybe the exception of Google today, you think nobody is ever going to unseat them in the place that they are. Because it's not just that they had better tech, but that better tech has built them a better user base, which has actually allowed them to continue to refine their tech. All right, so the question then becomes, so what are our flywheels in this space? What are the things that we could be doing with the data that we have and the actions we could be driving with it to create clinical outcomes that would bring more people to our communities to create better experiences and close this flywheel in our space? And that's what we're really going to talk about today. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, so why have we not done this to date? So, you've all been in the space, you have some pretty good ideas of why this is not possible. So, typical reasons that this happens: in reality, most of the technology that we use in the space is something that was built for a different space that has been lightly reskinned or repurposed for senior living. We get a lot of things that came out of hospital systems or other HR systems. And so we have things that are useful on their face, but not specific for our particular use cases. Because we've inherited things from lots of other parts, we have data silos. Some of our data lives in our CRM system, some of it lives in our care system, some lives in our EMR system, and there's like a parade of people. Thanks. And because of that, our data doesn't connect. We can't actually close this loop in the way that we want to. We typically also deal with inconsistent reporting, so we can't get the same numbers out of different systems. Things don't line up. It takes a long time to get people up to speed to use these systems, therefore we don't use them really well, or they're old and clunky and they're kind of painful, and so we kind of click through 100 screens to do basic tasks. Of course, we're always cost constrained, right? So we can't buy all the systems that we would want to, and at the end of the day, we are all in the business of taking care of people, and there's some amount of fear or risk associated with making big changes to the care that's being provided today. So that's why this has not historically happened. But if we could do this, then here are the things that we would hope to see, right? We would hope that we could increase the resident stay amount. We could change the number of adverse events that are actually happening inside our communities. We could improve employee retention and success. We could drive consistent operational best practices. And if we can kind of connect the data in the space, we might be able to engage families and improve margins. So the question becomes, are there things that we can do to create these flywheels inside of senior living? All right. there it is. If we can do this, we would actually get to a spot where we can actually drive these efficiencies and keep each of our stakeholders ideally engaged in what's actually going on. All right, so how are we going to go about doing this? So what we at Fynn are focused on is this idea of, can we better understand what is going on with the resident? And I'm going to walk you through 3 examples of how we are collecting data on our residents and what we use that information for. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is just how we go about collecting this data. So every time one of our CNAs interacts with a resident, we do a mini mental health assessment of that interaction. So we assess whether or not that person is confused, isolated, agitated, or combative. All right, and so we have every touch point that we collect that information. And that information creates profiles of our residents. So we can see how those residents behave on an hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis. And we can use algorithms to look through that data on our behalf. And when we find changes, we can close the loop with actions. So let me walk you through a couple different examples. So I'm going to show you a bunch of graphs, because that's what I like to do. And I'm going to orient you to these graphs. So the things to look at are on our y-axis over here. Closer to the top of this graph is good behavior, things we like to see. Bottom of the graph is worse behavior, things that we don't like to see. And if your eyesight is really good, you'll see that the x-axis is actually time of day. So on the far left here is just after midnight, and on the far right is just before midnight the following day. All right, we're going to start with our person on the left here. This is what we should think of as our baseline resident. So if we collected this information on any of us in this room, you would find that we look something like this, which is, if you wake us up in the middle of the night, you will find that we are probably agitated, we might be confused, we would like you to leave us alone so that we can go back to bed. But by the time we get up in the morning, we have our coffee, we reach some behavioral peak, and we hold that peak until we're ready to go to bed the next day. All right? This is what we would expect for all of us here. All right, let's shift over to one of our memory care residents here. So you'll notice the shape of this curve is very similar. Starts off low, comes up, drops off, goes down. But instead of going down at the end of the day, this person's behavior goes down at 2:30 in the afternoon, because this person has dementia and is experiencing sundowners. So like a lot of people with dementia, your body forgets most things. One of the things it forgets is when it's supposed to be asleep. It thinks it's supposed to be asleep earlier in the day, gets very confused for the rest of the day until that process restarts. That's why we encourage visits to our memory care residents typically in the morning, right? So we can actually take advantage of the good time when people are there. Not surprising, this person has dementia. Where this gets more interesting is when we look at the graph on the right. This is actually one of our assisted living residents. And this person is actually transitioning from this normal graph to this sundowning graph. So over time, they've looked more like the person on the left here, and now they're starting to more look like the person on the right. And that creates an opportunity for us to take action. Is there something that we can do interventionally from a clinical perspective to slow the progression of emerging sundowners? Are there things that we can do on a day-to-day basis to get them out maybe into more natural light to try to actually extend this throughout the day? Or, are we at a point where we've run out of interventions and it's time to have a conversation with a family member about, listen, 6 months ago, this is what mom's day-to-day looked like. This is what she's starting to look like today. It's time to think about that next level of care for mom. Make sense? All right, so data, trying to figure out algorithm to figure out when these things are happening, and tying to actions that we can take to try to recoup. All right, let me show you another one. Same flavor of graph. Top, good behavior. Bottom, worse behavior. And in this case, our x-axis is all of the interactions for each individual CNA taking care of this resident. So we have 11 different residents here on the bottom. And there's like a little bit of a cheat here, which is, in general, this resident actually has pretty good behavior, except for this one kind of opportunity down here. So there's clearly something going on. Now, a couple of things of note on this graph in particular. It turns out that every individual CNA has a different distribution of scoring. All right, so some people are more happy face oriented, some people are more frowny face oriented. And you can actually correct for that. So if I tend to be more happy, then I can kind of normalize that data to what the baseline is for that CNA, and we can actually look at that above that. The other thing is some tasks are inherently more difficult than others. Cleaning somebody's apartment is typically a less friction-based interaction than, let's say, helping somebody go to the bathroom. All right, but we can correct for that as well, right? So if we know what that baseline is, we can correct. But even with those corrections in place, we can see that there's something going on between this resident and this one CNA here. All right, so 2 possibilities. Possibility 1, this is a training opportunity. The next time that caregiver 9 goes to take care of resident 1, we should send our head nurse, and we should see if there's something that we can do from an approach or technique perspective to make this interaction better. Possibility 2, people are people. And sometimes 2 people don't get along, and that is actually okay. But if we know that, then what we should try to do is make it so that caregiver 9 is not taking care of resident 1. Caregiver 9 is not having a great time. Resident 1 is not having a great time. And so if we can remove that interaction, then what we can actually do is make the residents happier and make the care staff happier, ideally driving to more retention. In this particular case, this is actually a training opportunity. So this resident in particular likes to be given a lot of direction in their day. So if you go in and you say, it's going to be a great day today, we're going to get up, we're going to get dressed, we're going to go down for breakfast, we've got a morning activity, we're going to follow up by lunch, then we're going to come back and get ready before we go to dinner. Boom, resident gets started off on the right foot, great day. But if you go in and say, it's a great day today, we can do many things. What would you like to do? Resident gets all spun out of control with too many options and can't actually progress. So with a little bit of direction from the head nurse and a little bit of, hey, let's actually go ahead and make sure that we take a more directed approach with this resident, we're able to remove that friction point. So our action here is, can we actually offer training to our staff to improve these things as we go? All right, let me show you one more of these. In this case, same y-axis. Top is lots of happy faces. Bottom is lots of frowny faces. And this resident in particular is pretty well behaved. Some up days and some down days until a noticeable drop off on this right side where something actually went wrong with their behaviors over a period of time. All right, and we can actually quantify what that is. So in this particular case, there was a mistaken policy change put in place where this memory care resident was used to sleeping in every day until 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, having coffee in the room, getting ready, and then going down and having breakfast. And there was a mistake made where we were waking up this resident every day at 6 o'clock in the morning to make sure that they were ready with their peers to go down for some breakfast. And it turns out that after waking this person up for 10 days in a row, you started to see this negative behavior. And if you dive into this data further and you look at by individual care types, in this case, health checks, and by time of day, you can see that this entire drop-off is 100% attributed to this policy change. So by correcting this policy change, yeah, fire away.
Can you go back? How did you draw that conclusion?
How did I draw this conclusion?
The data. So like you're going in like the big drop and you go, okay, was it just situational awareness that you knew that that was the only variable that occurred during that time?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, really good question. So how do we draw that? So what's really going on under the hood here is we are basically building predictive models to try to estimate what somebody's expected behavior should be for that day. And we can actually look at the underlying features that cause that expected behavior based on who they interact with, based on the time that their ADLs happen, and based on the actual ADL type that's there. And so as soon as we see that drop off in behavior, we can ask the model the question of what changed in our inputs that made this behavior go down the most. And the model calls out this health check is the first thing that changed, and the second thing that changed was the introduction of a 6 a.m. interaction. And so the model can kind of like unwind what it's seeing and surface that to us.
Because it knows when that health check occurs.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, hey, this used to happen at 10, now it's happening at 8.
That's right.
6, I'm sorry.
Exactly, right? So you can just think of that as at any moment in time, we can ask the model, what should I expect if I took this action at this time? What would I expect to see? And then we can measure what we actually saw as a deviation from that. Yeah, keep going.
Does the model, I mean, do you see it getting to the point where on the front end you could load in like a predetermined set of data provided by like a consumer on the front end prior to admission, and then ask the model to kind of build out what does the most successful day look like for this person given these 100 parameters?
Great question. So the answer to your question is yes, and I'm gonna like try to, I'll be like unbiased and then biased for a second. So unbiased, the answer is yes. If you had a way to objectively collect behavior information before somebody moved into your community to better understand this, you would actually have that baseline already built before they actually started getting your care. To do that, it actually requires a little bit of technology work. And so there's really two ways that we, biased, do that. The first is we actually have an app that we give to family members so that they can collect this information prior to move-in, so they can better understand how people are changing. And the second is we also have a CRM platform, so as our marketing team is engaged, of course, yeah. Yeah, well, I wanted to be at least honest with you. Yeah. But that idea is the right one, which is like, well, how do we know what we're getting into? Because if we knew what we were getting into, we would actually have an optimized care plan for people before they arrive. Today, we struggle through the first 30, 60, 90 days of somebody's visit because we don't know. We got a few notes that said like, has a cat, right? Like not enough to really make clinical observations.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Like there's so many variables though that model is gonna have to be super refined.
Yeah. So,
even the moving into a community is a variable change.
Yes, you're 100% right. Now, so what is the advantage that some of those other companies have, right? They have scale. So as you have scale, you actually can see what happens to people, both before something and after that something. But you're right, these things are designed to get better over time, right? So let's say we were monitoring 100,000 people at move-in. We would actually start to build up a profile of what we expect to happen at move-in time. Today, yes, exactly. And you're right, like different people are gonna have different things. In what our data shows, there's really a couple different cohorts of people at move-in time. There's like the smooth and steadies, like they seem to be generally unfazed. There is the short-term change people, so really clunky for 30 days, 60 days, but then it kind of swings back to normal. And then there's the long-term, just takes a long time to build back up to something that looks close to the baseline they had on their way in. What those attributes are, I don't know yet, but that's kind of one of the things that we're really interested in. All right, so let me close kind of my part, and then I'll turn it back over to Rob here. If we think back to our playbook, the thing that we're really trying to figure out here is how do we collect information on people in a way that is useful? We use a mini mental health assessment. How do we build algorithms that can actually analyze this information? And when the algorithms find something, how do we dictate what actions we should take? So in our case, what we do is we actually create playbooks. So as we see people sundowning or staff training issues or quick declines in behavior, we actually have different playbooks that we run through. So if we notice a quick change in behavior, we need to engage this person's physician to see if there's anything that's happened. We actually have to increase our monitoring. We have to engage the family members to make sure that they're there. And we need to track those things in the system so that we know when we've done them all, were we able to bring them back to normal quick or slow? Because just like we're learning kind of the data collection piece, we're actually learning the playbook piece as well. So a little bit to your point, as we kind of do more and refine more, these things get better over time. How does introducing natural light impact sundowners? How does making a clinical training intervention impact people? How does actually changing, when we see these huge drop-offs in the things that we do, how quickly can we get them back? So this flywheel of collect interesting data, analyze the data with algorithms, create action, and then measure the outcome of that action allows you to kind of get this better over time. Make sense? Fire away, man. Small crowd.
Right, because it's a flywheel, so there's got to be something on the flywheel. The data, again, it's like any CRM, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Garbage in, garbage out.
It has amazing potential.
That's right. And we've done, personally, biased, we did work with the Mayo Clinic on actually trying to figure out what is the right sets of information that we should be collecting here. But it may turn out that these are not the right things. There might be some questions that tend to be, I'll call like very correlated. So, you might be reclusive and combative at the same time. That might be a very common standoff thing. And so we might be able to collect less information, and there might be another axes that we want to start collecting information on as well.
Yeah, I just feel like automated data collection would probably be key to this algorithm, right? Because just the act of data collection would be a variable in and of itself. Yeah, like wearable tech and things like that.
Yeah.
All have to tie in together. Bias, do you have wearable tech that kind of helps with that?
Bias, yes. The behaviors are great because they give us insight from people as they interact with residents. Sensors are great because they give us information on people when we're not interacting with them. And so you get a much richer kind of like insight into ups and downs on their profile. And then you can also overlay all the other attributes that you would expect: demographic information, health information, clinical conditions, everything else that comes with it.
Is anyone using wearables in their meetings right now?
We have but not for medical, so we use it for proxies, so we can identify where our residents are in buildings, and then they are then able to access certain areas based off of their wearable. But not this, right? Like not a pulse ox, right? Not a blood pressure.
You're not getting vitals, you're not getting movement and all that stuff.
No, but we do have motion sensors. So a lot of the nurse call systems have pressure pads, monitor pads, and motion detectors that trigger after 10 seconds of continuous use. But none of it ties into our care. None of it. It's a whole separate system.
Yeah, so our perspective, bias perspective is we work with a company that actually allows us to aggregate sensor data from different things. So for communities that have certain brands of sensors, let's say I'm a withing shop, they kind of normalize across different sensor types for us. So the data that's ingested is kind of pre-normalized into that system. And then everything is really just this resident profile. So you can just think of a resident profile as an observation by a person or thing at a moment in time. And that allows us to define that baseline. So if it is a continuous glucose monitor that is feeding us information on this person at different times, that becomes part of their profile. And deviations from that profile are the things that we're really flagging. All right, let me turn this one over to Rob to talk about some of the other places this information can be used.
Yeah, so everything that John's been discussing and been talking about, if you think about your care staff, your best care staff are intuitively doing what we're talking about here, right? They've got the relationships with the residents. They understand when something's changed. The key is being able to share that information with everyone else within the community, right? That's what's failing right now. That's back to what's failing. It's the technology, the ability to share all that information with people who are less experienced, who don't have those tight relationships with the residents, to make sure that everybody's on the same playing field. And so that is really what's necessary. So we've got the data, we've got the collection of the data, we've got the analysis of the data. You got to put it to practical application, but then you've got to share that information with everybody, right? And so you've got to record what's going on. You've got to inform everyone who's engaged, whether that's just within the four walls of the community or externally as well. And then you've got to manage that. You've got to monitor it, manage it, and continually evolve it. It's not a one and done kind of situation with any individual or the entire population. You're constantly analyzing this information, refining it back to the flywheel scenario. So how do you do it, right? So there are a couple ways, right? We've sort of outlined some ideas here. You've got a very manual process on the left, and you've got a more automated process on the right. And the automation, various degrees of automation. But the first thing you've got to do is figure out how do you collect that data, right? So we just said that all of your care staff, your best care staff, are intuitively kind of making these connections in their heads. Collect that somehow, whether it's a spreadsheet, whether it's an end of shift meeting where you're collecting all this information, but you're memorializing it. You actually have to record the data somewhere. On the more automated side of that, for the data collection, we were just talking about sensors. There are solutions out there that collect this information automatically as well as the staff is kind of going about their day-to-day activity. Once you've got the data, you've got to analyze that data, right? And so You've got lots of off-the-shelf BI tools, business intelligence tools. You've got, the Tableaus out there or the Power BIs. Take that data, put it into one of these things, and then run some analysis over it. It can be a very manual process. It can be once a week. It doesn't have to be, every hour, but you need to start to understand what's going on within the community with the specific residents. You'll start to pick up on specific things with individuals. You need to act on those pretty timely. On the automated side of that, obviously, you've already got kind of, again, off-the-shelf solutions with Google Health, with Fitbit, with all these others. If you're using the sensors, the wearables to collect this information, go ahead and leverage what they've already got out there. They'll give you kind of a head start on everything else. It doesn't have to go to the specificity that we've been talking about. Any information is good information, right? And then finally, you actually have to act on this, exactly what we've been talking about. So you've got your charts, you've collected your data in a spreadsheet, you've put it into Power BI, you've run your analysis, you can see that there's some things on it, you've got to do something with it. Put that in the hands of the care staff, put that in the hands of anyone within the community, inform the family of what's going on. There's something happening, we need to be aware of this. They might be able to provide you some more insight. On the automated side, you've got solutions like Fynn. You've got some others out there that can actually interpret all of this and actually put this to application very quickly. So, in summary, all of the assumptions that you're operating your communities on are based on what you're actually seeing, right? But data helps you see the bigger picture. Don't get eaten by the bear. But that's exactly what we're trying to do, is take everything that you sort of intuitively have a grasp on, formalize that, and make it more actionable. And that's the important part of this. So that is it. Any questions that we haven't already answered? Quiet crowd. All right. Well, look, John and I are going to hang around for the next few minutes while we transition to the next session. If you do have any questions, you want to talk to us, come on up. And we've got a booth out there if you feel like stopping by later on. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it.